Hold on a minute.
What's up?
Hey.
Here with Lee Camp.
Yes.
Here at the Strand Bookstore. Lee Camp just did a rather explosive set. A lot of comedy. Talking about his.
Thank you.
It really was. It was really very, very impressive, man. I don't do comedy. I don't get out much, but that was really that was really good. Man. Was really
Glad we got you out. That's a big compliment.
Stuff, so bullet points and
punchlines.
And punchlines. I was paying attention.
Yeah. He almost got the full title. Really.
Yeah, it's good stuff, man. So we're here in Strand, bookstore here in East Village. So you're paying attention to this? I hate to bring you down, but this Massachusetts election fraud. Are you following it? 8% off.
Yeah, 8% off. Yeah, I mentioned it when I was up here. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to cover it more on Redacted next week. So. And it was, for those who don't know, it was exit polls were 8% off from the machine result in 2016 as well, meaning it's the same style of fraud.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. And what about now there's revelations in Texas as well. We're getting ripped off again.
We are.
It's 2016 all over again.
Absolutely. They're doing it all again. I mean, people should have seen it coming, and the question is, what do people do now? Do they get angry, or do they just go, oh, well, what happened again?
Right. What is the solution? Are we going to 1 million people in the street nonsense, or maybe something worse, something more?
Well, I'm a big proponent of civil disobedience, so I think it needs to be large scale and continued in order to actually make them fear that people aren't going to go about business as usual. You know.
What do we say when Bernie Sanders says vote for Joe Biden? What do we tell him?
Well, considering this is definitely Bernie Sanders' last run, I think you can forget about Bernie Sanders when he starts saying vote for Joe Biden. But a lot of the ideas he put forward, I hope people keep talking about, because as even he said, it's not about him, it's about the ideas. So people need to keep fighting for things like health care as a human right.
That sounds good. Thank you very much, Lee. Good talking to you, man.
Appreciate
Good talking to you. Here with Ben Norton of the Gray Zone. Gray Zone. What's up, boss?
Hey, how you doing?
That was a good show, man. Lee Camp, you rocked the house, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah, no, it was fun.
So what do you think, Bernie Sanders, when the Democrats stick a knife in his back again and he says vote for Joe Biden, what are you going to tell him?
No, I mean, unfortunately, if he doesn't win the primary, that's pretty much inevitable. So we should keep that in mind. But there's a lot of young, especially, but not just young, and there's a lot of supporters of Bernie Sanders who are Bernie or bust. And I think that we should encourage that movement. And I actually think that guys at Chapo Trap House have a really good take on this. There's something they call the Will Menaker pledge, right? Where if Bernie's not the candidate, pledge to not vote or vote third party and destroy the Democratic Party. So I think Bernie or bust is like the only viable alternative at this point, because if Bernie Sanders is not going to be the presidential candidate, the Democratic Party, there's no reason for it to even exist. All it's going to do is just provide cover for the far right to continue to destroy the country. So Bernie or bust.
Right. It seems like Bernie Sanders, he's refusing to lead in the sense of saying, like, for example, Massachusetts was just stolen from him, right? And the exit polls don't match. Shouldn't a leader lead? What do you think about that? I mean, there's this overwhelming consensus that Bernie Sanders is not. He's not stepping up to the plate, and when he ultimately gets cheated, what do we say to what does he say to his people? Is what I'm trying to get to.
Well, look, the problem is that a lot of people, even people who are criticizing Bernie Sanders, don't think about politics as they should, which is that politics is about social movements.
It's not about him.
And it's not about one individual. The way history changes is through these mass movements that push history in a certain direction, and Bernie Sanders has a massive movement. Now, he as a candidate has many weaknesses. Not just this, he refuses to criticize Joe Biden. He has been inconsistent, especially in foreign policy and imperialism, and definitely he should be criticized, but at the same time, we should remember that there's a massive movement with a lot of popular energy behind Bernie Sanders. Right. And they don't necessarily see him as some kind of saint who's perfect. They support him because they're moving in a particular progressive direction, and also because he's fighting objectively against the establishment right-wing neoliberal Democrats. So in this moment, I think he's having a very progressive role, but if he's not the candidate and they steal it from him, then he's kind of outlived his purpose as a leader. And then the point is that we should push that movement forward and continue toward progressive change outside of the Democratic Party. We have to have a diversity of tactics, but one of the things that we shouldn't do is the system is of course rigged. Everyone knows that. Right. And it's rigged in many different ways. The exit polls, voter disenfranchisement, the fact that they're, not only just
crowd the stage. proud to state.
Absolutely. There's so many examples, but we can't just be so depressed about that we don't engage in the actual processes happening. We have to meet people where they are, and a lot of people have been mobilized by this movement. So I think that we should play a role as like the critical edge of this movement and help politicize people. I mean, I know a lot of, especially young people, but also older people who are kind of new to left-wing politics, and Bernie Sanders is kind of like their gateway. And eventually, if Bernie Sanders fails, we should continue pushing them more, and he could be like the gateway figure into left-wing politics.
Sounds good. One last question. If I followed your stuff on Venezuela. If you could say any one thing to Mike Pompeo right now, what would you say? What would you tell Mike Pompeo right now?
I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
Well, anything I would say, Mike, we are not the last generation of human beings on the earth. I know you believe that. I know you think the apocalypse is coming, but it's not. And science is real. But after that, I would say the sanctions that the U.S. government has imposed on Venezuela are mass murder. They have killed tens of thousands of civilians. I have seen with my own eyes how these illegal, criminal, unilateral U.S. sanctions are killing huge numbers of people. They have decimated the healthcare system, and they have done nothing to actually try to implement the policy of regime change, which is, of course, what the U.S. wants. So, lift the sanctions immediately. It is absolutely criminal. The U.S. has the blood of thousands of civilians in Iran, Venezuela, Nicaragua, so many countries, Zimbabwe, that are suffering under these sanctions. Sanctions are not an alternative to war. Sanctions are another form of war, economic war on the entire population.
Thank you so much for your time, Ben. Good talking to you, man.
Thanks. And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.